There are certain places that are supposed to feel safe. Your home, a quiet hiking trail, even a boring, empty workplace. These are the spaces where we let our guard down, where we believe we're insulated from the dangers of the world. But sometimes, that sense of security is just an illusion. The membrane between safety and terror is thinner than we think, and it can be punctured by something as simple as a strange noise, an unfamiliar face, or a door that's open when it should be locked. These are stories from people who found themselves in those exact situations when the ordinary and the mundane were suddenly twisted into something terrifying. This happened about 5 years ago when I moved into my first apartment. I was 22, fresh out of college, and it was my first real taste of independence. The building was an old brick walk-up in a quiet, leafy part of the city. It had character, which was my polite way of saying it was a little rundown. The floors creaked, the pipes groaned, and the heating was temperamental, but it was all mine. The rent was cheap, and for the first time in my life, I had a space that belonged to me and me alone. My apartment was on the second floor, a small one-bedroom at the end of a long hallway. The building's layout was a bit of a maze, a relic of a time when architects had different priorities. The laundry room, for instance, was tucked away in a remote corner of the basement, a concrete box with 2 aging washing machines and a constant damp chill in the air. For the first few weeks, everything was normal. I settled into a routine, enjoying the solitude and the freedom. But then, the small odd things started to happen. Things you'd barely notice, things you could easily explain away. I'd come home from work to find my mail on the little table by the door, but one of the envelopes would be slightly steamed open, its flap not quite sealed shut again. I dismissed it as a post office error. Then, I started hearing noises at night. A faint, rhythmic scratching sound coming from the wall that my bed was pushed up against. I told myself it was mice or just the building settling. It was an old place after all. My next-door neighbor was an older man named Mr. Abernathy. I only saw him a handful of times in the hallway. He was a small, stooped man who always wore the same tweed jacket, no matter the weather. He'd offer a brief, tight-lipped smile, but his eyes were what unsettled me. They were a pale, watery blue, and they had a way of fixing on you, unblinking for just a second too long. It felt less like he was looking at you and more like he was memorizing you. Still, he seemed harmless enough, just a lonely old man. One Tuesday night, I realized I was completely out of clean work shirts. With a heavy sigh, I gathered my laundry basket and trudged down the 3 flights of stairs to the basement. It was almost 11 p.m., and the building was silent. The laundry room was as I'd left it, cold, empty, and lit by a single, buzzing fluorescent tube that cast long, dancing shadows. I loaded my clothes into one of the machines, poured in the detergent, and sat down on a rickety plastic chair to wait, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. The washing machine churned and sloshed, the sounds echoing in the concrete room. As it hit the spin cycle, the whole machine started to vibrate violently. A lone sock, which I must have dropped, shimmied its way off the top of the machine and fell into the dark, dusty gap between the washer and the wall. I let out a frustrated groan. I finished the cycle, transferred everything to the dryer, and then set about retrieving the lost sock. I knelt down, squeezing myself into the narrow space. It was too dark to see anything, so I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing the beam into the grimy space behind the washing machine. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't the sock. It was a hole. A small, jagged hole in the drywall, no bigger than a quarter, right at floor level. It wasn't a mouse hole. The edges were too rough, as if it had been gouged out with a screwdriver. My apartment was directly above this spot,
But this wall was the one that separated the laundry room from the basement storage unit that belonged to Mr. Abernathy's apartment. Curiosity, a stupid primal urge, took over. I leaned in closer, pressing my eye to the opening. The beam from my phone's flashlight provided just enough ambient light. I could see into his storage unit. It was cluttered with dusty boxes and old furniture, what you'd expect. But as my eye adjusted, I saw something else, propped up against the far wall. Photographs, dozens of them, pinned to a large corkboard. They were grainy, long-distance shots. One was of me getting out of my car. Another was of me carrying groceries up the front steps. Another, taken through my own living room window at night, showed the blurry silhouette of me watching television. A cold, liquid dread filled my stomach. He had been watching me. The mail, the scratching noises, it all crashed down on me at once. I felt a wave of nausea. I started to pull back, to get out of there, to call the police. But before I could move, the view through the hole was suddenly blocked. An eye, pale and watery blue, filled the tiny opening from the other side. It was looking right back at me. I didn't scream. I couldn't. All the air left my lungs in a silent gasp. I scrambled backwards so fast I slammed my head against the dryer, the metallic clang ringing in my ears. I didn't wait for my laundry. I bolted out of that basement, up the stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to break free. I fumbled with my keys, burst into my apartment, and slammed every lock I had. I called 911, my voice shaking so badly I could barely get the words out. The police arrived quickly. They went down to the basement, and then they knocked on Mr. Abernathy's door. There was no answer. After getting permission from the building manager, they let themselves in. His apartment was almost empty. A bed, a small table, a single chair. No clothes in the closet, no food in the fridge. He was gone. In the basement storage unit, the corkboard and all the photos were gone too. The only thing they found was the peephole. And not just the one in the laundry room. They found others, one in the back of a shared hallway closet aimed at the apartment across from me. Another in the ceiling of the boiler room, pointed up towards the floor of the apartment of the young woman who lived on the first floor. I moved out the following week. I broke my lease, packed my things, and never looked back. I still think about that eye. That calm, unblinking eye watching me through a hole in the wall of a place I had thought was safe. It taught me a valuable lesson. You never really know who is on the other side of the wall.
My younger brother, Leo, and I basically grew up in the woods. Our house was on the edge of a small town in the Pacific Northwest, backed by a huge expanse of state forest. For us, the trails behind our house were our backyard. We knew the main loops like the back of our hands. The creek trail, the ridge path, the trail that led to the old fire tower. Hiking was our thing. This was during the fall of my senior year of high school, so Leo was a freshman. It was one of those perfect autumn afternoons, crisp and clear, with the leaves turning brilliant shades of red and gold. We were feeling adventurous and decided to try a new route. On one of our old creased park maps, there was a faint dotted line branching off the main ridge path, labeled only as Service Trail. It looked overgrown and forgotten, which, to our teenage minds, made it irresistible. We pushed past the ferns and fallen branches that obscured the trailhead and started down the path. Almost immediately, the atmosphere changed. The familiar sounds of the forest, the chatter of squirrels, the call of jays, the rustling of unseen things in the undergrowth, faded away into an unnerving silence. The air grew still and heavy.
The only sound was the crunch of our own boots on the blanket of dead leaves. "It's weirdly quiet back here," Leo said, his voice a little softer than usual. "It's cool," I said, trying to sound confident, like the cool older brother. "Means no one ever comes this way." We walked for another 20 minutes, the path narrowing as we went. Then we started finding them. Little, deliberate markers. On the side of the trail, a small, perfectly balanced pyramid of 7 smooth gray stones. 100 yards later, a small piece of bright red yarn tied neatly around a low-hanging branch. Then another, this time a strip of blue cloth. They weren't trail markers. They felt like something else, something more personal. It felt less like we were exploring and more like we were trespassing. "I don't like this, man," Leo said, stopping to look back the way we came. "It feels like someone's watching us." He was right. I felt it too. A prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the kind that makes you want to turn around, but you're too afraid of what you might see. But I was the older brother. I was supposed to be brave. "Don't be a wimp," I said, pushing him lightly on the shoulder. "Let's just see what's at the end of the trail." The end of the trail wasn't a road or a viewpoint. It was a clearing. And in the middle of the clearing stood a small, dilapidated cabin. It was a wreck built from rough-hewn logs with a sagging roof and windows like dark, empty eyes. It wasn't on any of our maps. It looked like it had been there for 100 years, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. My stupid teenage curiosity won out over the growing knot of fear in my stomach. "Let's check it out," I whispered. The front door was slightly ajar, hanging crookedly on one rusted hinge. We pushed it open and stepped inside. The air in the cabin was frigid, and it stank of mildew, damp earth, and something else. A faint, coppery smell, like old pennies. The inside was a single small room, mostly empty except for a rotting mattress in the corner and a rickety wooden table in the center. On the table was a strange collection, at least a dozen old tarnished silver lockets, all arranged in a neat row. They were beautiful in a creepy antique sort of way. I picked one up. It was heavier than it looked. I worked the tiny clasp with my thumbnail and it sprang open. I expected to see a faded miniature portrait of some long-lost love, but it wasn't a picture. Nestled in the velvet lining was a small, yellowed human tooth. A molar. I dropped the locket as if it had burned me. It hit the wooden table with a dull clatter. Leo's eyes were wide with horror. "We have to go," he breathed, "now." He didn't have to tell me twice, but as we turned to leave, we heard it. A sound from outside. A low, melodic whistling. It was a simple, tuneless melody, just a few notes repeated over and over. It wasn't the wind, it was a person, and it was getting closer. Panic, pure and absolute, seized us. We didn't go for the front door. We scrambled to the back of the cabin, where a piece of the wall had rotted away, creating a small opening. We squeezed through, scratching ourselves on the splintered wood, and ran. We didn't run back down the path we'd come from. We just ran blindly deeper into the silent woods, desperate to put distance between us and that cabin. The whistling followed. It seemed to echo through the trees, sometimes sounding like it was right behind us, sometimes far off to our left, then our right. It was like we were being herded. We crashed through thickets, stumbled over roots, our lungs burning. The sound of that terrible, serene whistle chasing us through the dead, quiet forest. I don't know how long we ran. It felt like an eternity. But finally, we burst out of the tree line, gasping for air, and found ourselves on the shoulder of a paved road. We were miles from where we'd started, completely disoriented. The sun was setting. The whistling was gone. We never told our parents what happened. How could we? What would we even say? That we found a creepy cabin filled with teeth lockets and were chased by a phantom whistler? They would have thought we were making it up. We never went back to that part of the forest again. But the memory of that day is branded into my mind. The guilt I feel for pushing Leo, for ignoring his fear, and leading him into that nightmare still eats at me. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I think I can hear it. A faint, faraway melody carried on the breeze. And the hair on the back of my neck stands right up.